This program was created in part utilizing the Sound Collection Lab located in the History, Social Sciences, Philosophy Department on the campus of the University of Arkansas at Fort Smith. The views expressed herein do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of History, Social Sciences, Philosophy, or its faculty, or the University of Arkansas at Fort Smith.
Hey, welcome back to Bill Hollenbeck's Beyond the Badge. I am Bill Hollenbeck, and my partner here is Dr. Kevin Jones.
Good afternoon.
Extraordinaire. Hey, thank you so much for being with us. Again, if you like this content, please make sure that you like and subscribe. This episode, again, is coming from the University of Arkansas here at Fort Smith at the Sound Collection Lab. Also, this is a new studio. We have new equipment. So it just looks fantastic in here, and we just want to say thank you to the University of Arkansas and all of their donors who have really stepped up to make this program a success, as well as providing this for the whole community.
Absolutely.
So it's just
Dr. Dan Maher especially, and Dr. Matt McCoy and all of their help, and specifically this comes from the Porter Legacy Initiative, made possible by the generous support of the Porter Legacy Initiative by Covington, Baskin, Pat Porter. Legacy Initiative was founded by the generous donations of the UA Fort Smith Foundation donor, and for decades Pat Porter was a West Ark Community College instructor and beacon to the Fort Smith community. The Porter Legacy Initiative has made possible the launch of the Archivist in a Backpack project and other programs here at the Sound Collection Lab, and specifically the Ray Gossick Endowment. Ray Gossick, former city administrator, had an ambassador student internship, and we are very happy to have all of this to help our students here on this campus, and everything from production to editing. They're doing their own content. But right now, back to Bill Hollenbeck.
Hey, just a side note, back to the Ray Gossick Foundation.
Oh, yeah.
What a great man.
Yes.
You know, I really enjoyed working with him. He cared about the community, and his legacy certainly does live on through this foundation. So, again, we appreciate everybody involved in making all these programs worthwhile.
As we both say, we're just lucky to be here.
Darn tootin'. You know, today, a little different podcast. It's going to be just Kevin and I. We're going to talk about some law enforcement history. His name is Wiley Cox, and he had a nickname of the time in that era of Deadshot Cox. So obviously he must have gotten into a few scrapes.
Must have been pretty good at his job.
Must have been good at his job. And we're going to talk about a few of those individual situations that he was actually involved in. He was cross-deputized for a while. He was a city of Fort Smith detective in the 1800s. He was also a deputy marshal or deputy sheriff for Sebastian County, and also was cross-deputized as a posse man or deputy marshal with the U.S. Marshal Service. So there's numerous occasions that are documented where he bounced back and forth and occasionally would posse up with the marshals and head over into the Indian Nations and track down bad guys. So this episode should be really interesting, I hope, for all of you about the history, because, you know, one of the things that I've noticed, we're so lucky that our local historians found all this great information about Bass Reeves, you know, and the exploits that he was involved in. But, you know, there was also hundreds of other marshals and law enforcement officers in this community that they too probably had an exciting career and some adventures that are certainly worth telling to help, I guess, calm the frontier and keep the citizens of the community during that time safe. And Wiley Cox is one of those people.
Absolutely.
And Kevin, a side note, you know, I'm trying to refresh my memory, but a really good friend of mine, Philip Peavyhouse, who
Yes.
was a investigator at the sheriff's office in Fort Smith, who now works for Crawford County in a new position. I want to congratulate him on that. It's a position of leadership within their criminal investigations division.
Mm-hmm.
So, but anyway, years ago, he and I decided to start doing a little research about the sheriff's office. It was shortly after Leadership Fort Smith course that I went through. Dan Shue, who was our prosecuting attorney, and some other members of that class raised funds for a law enforcement memorial there at the Sebastian County Courthouse. So I was very fortunate to be involved in the raising of that memorial, which still stands to this day.
That's right, as it should.
And you know, we wanted to make sure that all the law enforcement officers present and past were justifiably honored for the work that they did. And through that research, came across the name of Wiley Cox. And Philip and I started researching it a little bit more, where we actually found where his grave plot is out at Oak Cemetery.
Oak Cemetery in Fort Smith, Arkansas.
Yeah. There's a lot of other marshals out there, and I think, didn't you find some information, I guess, about Oak Cemetery that
I came across this article written in 2014 in a journal called Markers, the annual journal of the Association for Gravestone Studies. And in 2014, Ryan Cederman, trifocals, Cederman writes that up until really the 80s and 90s, 1980s and 90s, Fort Smith didn't really want to talk about that history. They didn't want to support the background of these families. But suddenly in the 80s and 90s, everybody wanted to jump on board and say, well, my so-and-so was a marshal who rode for Parker. And that was the phrase that started to pop up all over the place. They rode with Parker. And although we'd had the historic site back to 1961, Oak Cemetery didn't really go back to the graves and actually make new headstones in some cases for many of these people who were on one side of the law or the other in Oak Cemetery. And going back, Addison Beck was really the first one that they recognized who in his lifetime had a marker as being law enforcement. Nobody else really had that on their tombstone in the contemporary era, but then in the 80s and 90s, suddenly it starts being added, the career about these people. They wanted to showcase them.
Fascinating. That is so neat. And speaking of Addison Beck and
tragic
a tragedy, along with his posthumous Lewis Merritt, which ties into kind of what we're going into with Wiley Cox. But on Thursday, it was September the 27th in 1883, Deputy U.S. Marshal Addison Beck, along with his posthumous Lewis Merritt, rode into the Cherokee Nation, just across the bridge, basically, into Oklahoma, what is now Oklahoma. And they were attempting to serve some warrants for whiskey violations on two ruffians named John Bart and Johnson Jacks. Johnson Jacks was kind of a well-known outlaw at the time who had skirted the law and was very well known in the area itself. So I think the confrontation happened around 11 a.m. when Addison Beck, very famous, again, Deputy U.S. Marshal, along with Merritt, they tracked the suspects to what is now just an area just east of Weber Falls in Oklahoma. So that's a good little ways away. And then there was a gunfight. As the lawmen approached, they suddenly got into a violent shootout with the two outlaws, and Deputy Beck was shot in the head and he was killed instantly. The posse man, or the deputy Merritt, was also critically wounded in the chest and also in the head, but he actually survived the initial blast, and from what I recall, he was able to ride back to Fort Smith to alert the other marshals as to what happened. Merritt, in the gunfight, Merritt was approached. Merritt was approached by, at that time, the helpless Deputy Merritt, and then shot him a couple more times. So Bart, really nice, yeah. So John Bart escaped completely unscathed, while Jacks fled into the territory. He was wounded, bleeding heavily, and sustained several shots in that crossfire. So as he made it back, there was a posse that was assembling. They decided to assemble a posse to go after Johnson Jacks. And
This
it
is
was-
where you also get into special deputization.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, from some of the research that I've done and what is interesting, even to this day, the marshals will cross-deputize, you know, local law enforcement when they need assistance. Nowadays, it's like with task forces and so forth, but even back then, they would be cross-deputized to be able to go into the Indian Nation to track down the bad guys that needed to be captured and so forth. So the posse was led by Deputy U.S. Marshal Columbus Ayers. Also riding along him was another very famous deputy marshal, not famous at the time, but certainly is famous here in Portsmouth, and that was Bass Reeves.
That's right.
Wiley Cox, Deputy Wiley Cox, was also on that posse, along with several other notable deputies like H.D. Fannin and Brian Colbert were on the posse. So they went back towards the scene of the gunfight,
Right.
and actually started tracking down the bad guy at that time, literally following the blood trail, the horse trail, and tracks and so forth, and they were able to corner Johnson Jacks, not too terribly far from Weber Falls, from what I understand, and they were actually able to arrest him for the most part without incident. But it's kind of an interesting story of how in times of tragedy, even to this day, you know, and I can certainly attest to that in my career, law enforcement from across the area will assemble to help out in,
Sure.
in critical incidents, and this at that time was probably one of the many major critical incidents that occurred. So
But then going back to Cox, you said he was cross-deputized himself from city police to...
city police to the marshals, and I think later on we'll talk about
Right.
how he actually was involved in some sort of political
Oh, yes.
fray.
We'll get into that.
There you go, where he left the city police.
Politics and
department.
law enforcement?
Gosh,
What?
how
That
did
never
that-
happens.
Yeah, even to this day, it never happens, does it, Ken? No. But anyway, what's interesting also about that is Johnson Jacks never lived to face the hanging judge, Isaac Parker. He died from complications after his capture. His wounds apparently were festering, according to a news article that he'd received during the shootout with Addison Beck. Because John Bart managed to permanently evade capture, the families of Beck and Merritt received only partial justice. Deputy Beck and Lewis Merritt were returned to Arkansas, and they were buried side by side there at Oak Cemetery.
Right.
And then it goes back to that article where, what you found, where on his headstone it actually described him as a lawman. So,
Right.
Which was unusual at the time. It's pretty interesting.
Very rare for the time, and even only until the 1980s, 1990s, were these headstones added to and developed. And going back just a little bit on some of that information, the cross-deputization we would have never known about for some of these people without archives. And the work by, let's say, Amelia Martin and people like that who have written these great articles, or the numerous books about Fort Smith. Some of them reference cross-deputization, but unless you go to the archives, which are in Sebastian County Archives, which you and I kind of started talking about back in 2014, 2015, and which is an ongoing project with the digitization and access of those files, which is still ongoing by the University of Arkansas Fort Smith and Sebastian County. We would have never known. And Addison Beck's personal papers are available, but that's in Fayetteville at the other university up the hill. But there is a large collection here at the University of Arkansas Fort Smith as well, and Fort Smith Museum of History. But we're also developing that access so researchers can find this.
You know, and that is so important. I mean, to learn about our history it teaches us more about today as well. You know, and so I'm glad that the university and you're still involved.
We're still trying
to get that. And I know that was
We've digitized over
tedious-
10,000 documents
Wow.
at this point.
tedious, hard work that gets very little gratitude. But thank you so much for continuing that. But it's so important to continue that.
Right.
You know, that's just lost history. Even from some of the exploits of Wiley Cox, we would never know
No.
unless we know where to find that.
The
you know?
digitization of newspaper articles helps too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, even with the databases and with AI now, it might hopefully make it a little quicker, a little easier.
Gotta be careful with AI though.
Well, because it's a little messed up on several occasions, which I've noticed. But also the Fort Smith Public Library is also a really good resource for the history and so forth of that. And I think that's where I actually found where Wiley Cox was buried. Was through the Fort Smith Public Library, through all of their archives, and because it was all on microfilm and so forth.
What else did you find out, Bill?
All sorts of good stuff. So we'll talk about an incident, here in Fort Smith.
He was an interesting character.
He really was. He really was. There was one incident that really, I think, raised the bar of his reputation. Seriously, as a law enforcement officer, and that's and he's tied in with the Bonneville house.
Yeah.
With Captain, then later on General Bonneville. And I believe it was his daughter or stepdaughter that was still living in the house, and this was around 1885, 88, 87, I can't remember the exact date. But, the house...
We're losing some of the audio.
Okay, thank you.
You might.
Get a little bit closer.
Try that.
How about now?
Go back to how Cox got involved with it.
What's really interesting is how...
his legend
Wiley
grew.
Cox, actually, his legend grew as a result of the Bonneville house and the residents who lived there at the time. And they were, this was, of course, we talked, just a second ago about General Bonneville, who also was a prominent figure here in the history of Fort Smith. And also that family was very prominent at the time, too. They lived there off of 7th Street in what is now the Bonneville house. That was probably, I'm assuming, because the houses are beautiful to this day, so that was probably the rich, influential area of Fort Smith.
Absolutely.
The house itself also sat on numerous acres, and they had cattle and they had horses. And so what had apparently happened, there were some horse thieves that basically stole cattle and stole some horses from Mrs. Bonneville. They frequented Fort Smith, but they would like to steal horses from elite families, which is interesting. I don't know.
Because they had the best
They
horses.
probably had the best horses. They weren't nags.
Well, if you're going to steal a car.
You don't want to steal a nag or anything like that. But Sebastian County Deputy Wiley Cox was assigned to that case. And so, you think about, I just go back to my, times when I was a detective working cases and how I was able to solve crimes and so forth. And of course, the modern era of computers and communication and being able to reach out to other agencies, electronically is great ways to solve crime. But back then, they had none of that.
No.
You had your deputy, you had your horse, and you had your whiz. And somehow or another, through some great detective work, he found out that the horses led out of town, out there on the Texas Road, which is now what? Towson Avenue.
Towson Avenue.
There you go. And then it goes
to Fort Towson, which people don't know about that connection, but that's another episode.
That's another episode. But they led out to Texas. Articles from the Fort Smith Elevator newspaper at the time basically said that he had to continually swap the exhausted mounts. And one article said that he swapped mounts 7 times chasing these horse thieves. He tracked them all the way down into Texas. And once he got into Texas, he was able to apprehend the suspects, recover the horses, and then, so we're talking, what, 250, 280 miles, to Dallas, Fort Worth. And so this happened, I think, on the other side of, or somewhere between Dallas and Fort Worth. Maybe it was Grand Prairie, Arlington area, which is what it's called now. But he was able to single-handedly track these people down, recover the horses, march the horses all the way back, the 280 miles back to Fort Smith, along with the 2 outlaws who were handcuffed and in chains.
Right.
All
And
the way
probably
back.
not happy
Right.
at all.
Isn't that correct? Yeah.
And he had to feed them too.
And had to feed them
And
and
the
take care
horses.
of them, and the horses had to stay awake probably 90% of the time to make sure he wasn't jumped by the outlaws. And but the first stop he made was there at the Bonneville house and dropped off the horses. Then he marched his prisoners down to the county courthouse and threw them in jail.
And what did he get, $2?
Yeah, who knows what he got paid back then? Yeah, but true to his Deadshot reputation, Cox didn't just bring back the livestock. Again, he was able to bring back the outlaws in irons to face I said the county, but the article says the federal jail, because apparently I guess they crossed state lines and it was a federal offense and so forth. So, but that was just kind of a little snapshot of 1880s justice.
Sure.
Of the type of work that these deputies and officers did here in the city of Fort Smith, the county, as well as the U.S. Marshals, that rode for Parker at the time. But it definitely solidified his reputation among the elite citizens of Western Arkansas. And I think that popularity certainly helped him out on another case that we'll talk about.
And he develops yet another nickname.
Yeah. And we'll go into the throat slasher story here in a little while.
Sure.
But he was there, just like we were, or are, there to protect life and property and so forth. But we also know one thing, a little bit more so now, hopefully a lot more now, but the people who were the lawmen of that day, also they skirted both sides of the law. 1 minute they're a lawman, and next minute they're an outlaw. One minute they're an outlaw, and then maybe another state that we'll talk about, you're a law enforcement officer as well. So in 1887, there was a famous case. It was called the D. Baker and Company burglary ring.
Lost the audio on that.
I'm sorry, the D. Baker and Company burglary ring that he was involved in. The crime took place in December of 1887. It was a high-value heist that took place at the D. Baker Company merchandise store. It was a gang of thieves managed to break in and escape into the night with over $300 worth of elite clothing, custom jewelry, and specialty dry goods. So the operation developed of an investigation, and there was an individual named Captain Henry Surratt and Sergeant Floyd Wilson with Fort Smith PD at the Fort Smith Police at the time, or they could have been constables, I'm not sure. But Wiley Cox teamed up with those two gentlemen and started to investigate the crime. Floyd Wilson, just a little side note, he would later famously become the first person who was killed by the outlaw Henry Starr.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, is Wilson also in Oak Cemetery? I believe he is.
I think he is
Okay,
as well.
go ahead.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
So, they worked several underworld informants, as the article says. Cox and his partners successfully tracked down and arrested two of the principal members of the ring, Martin Council and Henry Blackburn were the two, Harvey Blackburn were the two main culprits of that. They successfully recovered a portion of the stolen luxury merchandise, and they were able to apparently broke up some of the jewelry and so forth, but they cached it somewhere out in the woods, and they were able to go out there and recover that and so forth. So several items. Also, there's a couple little notes that I've kind of took right here from cases that he also worked. There was a case where it says deputy. This is also from the Fort Smith Elevator. Fort Smith Sheriff's Deputy Wiley Cox run down a burglar in the morning after he had gone through the night's work as a burglar. He actually chased him down and was able to effect an arrest. Talks about how this one burglar had worked burglaries all the way from Little Rock all the way to Fort Smith. And he, I guess they searched a trunk, and they found a stolen pistol, small gold watches, chains, gold, silver, 3 gold chains, new suits, clothing, and of that nature.
Quite a bust.
That was a big old bust, especially for back then. Another time, he was going after another horse thief, and about 20 miles just east of Fort Smith. So I'm guessing that potentially is Lavaca or maybe Charleston or so forth. He caught up with them and exchanged gunshots and continued the pursuit, where he eventually pursued him all the way to Huntsville, Arkansas,
Right.
and effected an arrest there and brought back the stolen horse, the stolen wagon, and so forth. I mean, it's like at 8 o'clock or 5 p.m., you just don't go home back in the day.
No.
You know, I mean, I guess you're pitching a little fire and you have a little bivouac and you take up the chase the next day when, in fact, you can see what you're doing. And so, you know, what is, you know, Huntsville, what, 100 miles from here, 75, 80 miles from here? So, and on horseback, that is quite the trip, especially over the Ozarks. You know, the terrain was rough and tough and so forth and so on. But, you know, he to me, probably is an amazing law enforcement officer back in the day. But again, he's just one of many, many, many deputy marshals, deputy sheriffs, city officers, where this is all lost history unless there's people that are out there that are willing to dig it up and share it, you know?
Absolutely.
And people who are willing to get it, go out there and dig into these archives and make it easier for people to find. So it's I think it's really important. That's our history. Fort Smith has such a large history of law enforcement with the marshals and Judge Parker and so forth. And again, these people were cross-deputized, and some of these non-famous law enforcement officers, Kevin, I mean, they certainly deserve the credit.
Absolutely.
That people like Bass Reeves certainly has deserved his credit as well. So I think it's important to recognize all of them as much as we possibly can. You mentioned politics back in the day.
Yes.
You know, I mean, there was.
That happens later in 1889.
1889, it was
Yeah.
the political surge of senior law enforcement officers with the Fort Smith Police.
Now, this is with the mayor?
Well, the mayor, who was vying for a federal position as postmaster.
Okay.
You know, he wanted that position. I guess it was a well-paid position, you know.
Right.
It was a political position as well. But there was somebody else who I don't recall who was actually trying to get that job itself, but City Detective Wiley Cox, Captain Henry Surratt, and Sergeant Floyd Wilson apparently signed a petition supporting another person to get the postmaster's position. And of course, you know, that didn't go very well with the mayor.
No.
So
And
who wanted
Cox
that
and
job?
John McDaniel were relieved of duty. These men were the most senior men in the department, and newer policemen were retained by the city. The newspaper went on to say that they believed it was political. Surely not.
Potentially, but there was a very large fallout, you know. So again,
Okay.
Cox, who was a very popular, you know, lawman at the time, the city council erupted into an uproar after losing their premier detective. The matter was forced before a special police committee because of his unparalleled tracking skills. Cox was quickly brought back into local operations, expanding his duties to serve heavily as a trusted Sebastian County deputy and part-time member of the Marshals.
And
Awesome.
Wilson comes back with the Fort Smith Federal Court as a deputy U.S. Marshal.
Wow, that's pretty neat.
Go ahead.
That's kind of cool. I think that's interesting. So I would imagine, just whether it's city or county or state or federal,
Right.
there's politics involved. So
Sure.
some of these influential people probably went to the U.S. Marshal or the federal judge and said, hey, we need to find a position, or went to the county sheriff and said, hey, you need to hire this guy as a deputy. He's an outstanding tracker and
Right.
outstanding lawman. So, you know, having that, I guess having that stroke of being a good law enforcement officer in times of trouble certainly pays off.
Even the U.S. Marshal obviously is a political appointee, right?
Yes, absolutely. Appointed by the
President.
of the United States. Absolutely. Okay, so let's.
I was moving around the timeline a little
Yeah.
bit because I wanted to get into, that happened in 89?
1889.
Okay, what about 1886?
And
Go back to Fort
Worth.
Worth.
There you.
And what happened down there, and he develops a new nickname. Did you want to get into that?
In Fort Worth
Yeah.
or Fort Smith?
Well, it's Fort Worth paper.
Okay, but it actually happened in Fort Smith. You're talking about the
He's
the
held
bar
for
fight.
murder. Wiley
Yes.
Cox, the Fort Smith
Yes.
throat cutter.
Yes.
In a jail cell is what the article in the paper reads from Fort Worth.
Okay, I think that actually happened in Fort Smith, but it
Oh,
made the
okay.
papers all over,
All right.
for sure. So, it was a
Detective
deadly.
Wiley Cox is
There you
charged
go.
with the murder of ex-city marshal John Kemp in this city
Mm-hmm.
on 29th.
There you go.
Concluded today. This would have been October 12th.
All righty.
Kemp was a proprietor of a saloon, and just before daylight on the morning of the 29th, Cox and Deputy City Marshal Larve got into a fight. Do you want to go into that?
Okay, so, yeah, I'll talk, a little bit. And what's interesting is the information that you have is very similar to what I have, but again,
Proceed.
this happened in Fort Smith and so forth. But it's really important. But this happened in September 1886. It was a violent clash, and Cox utilized a knife to overcome Kemp, dealing fatal wounds. John Kemp was the ex-chief of police at the time, and so there was probably a little
Some bad blood.
Yeah, bad
blood.
Yeah, absolutely. Why was he the ex-chief of police? Probably politics and so forth. And so we don't know the true behind the scenes story, but I'll talk a little bit about the trial.
Maybe they were mouthing each other,
Could
What are
be.
you doing in here,
But apparently Cox was there to arrest somebody
Uh-huh.
with another officer, and during the arrest, the barkeep, who was the ex-chief of police,
Right.
intervened and jumped on Cox. The deputy, apparently, who was with Cox, yelled at Cox, "Watch out!" And from gathering from what the article says, I think Kemp was getting the better of Cox and had Cox on the ground, and Cox basically pulled a knife to get him off and stabbed him right there in the throat, and the man died. So the state pushed hard for conviction, arguing that Cox had used excessive force and unjustified force against a prominent citizen. The defense strategy basically was that Cox's defense team relied heavily on the legal doctrine of self-defense.
Right.
In the frontier, they brought forward witness after witness from the saloon to testify that Kemp was the aggressor, the aggressive adversary who posed an immediate, deadly threat. Good, I would be using those words too if I'm trying to justify my actions.
But the chaos too, listen to the detail here according to the article again. Cox denies that he did it, and his attorneys claim, quote, it
Was a glass that was
might have been done
Yeah.
with a glass, as Kemp was thrown a glass, or his partner had thrown a glass and struck Cox in the forehead while the fight was in progress, but he claims he did not have it thrown until after Kemp's throat was actually cut. His friends will endeavor to get him out on bond. Cox is a well-known officer and has done some good work in bringing criminals to justice, so go ahead.
So, gosh, the defense and the prosecution slightly disagreeing. Huh? Interesting. I think reading between the lines, I think it, and again, I don't know this, but just some of the research I've looked at, lawmen back then, and even to this day, carry knives. For whatever reason,
Sure.
they might need it. It could be to dip to cut a saddle or restitch or anything like that, or kill a snake, or
Sure.
or get somebody off of it, right? If
Sure.
they run out of ammo. But they argue that Cox was acting strictly within the rights to protect his own life during a chaotic brawl. The verdict came back. So the jury ultimately sided with Wiley Cox, delivering a full acquittal. The town's business community largely supported the verdict, viewing Cox as a necessary shield against the lawman creeping across the border from the nearby Indian nation. Kind of goes back to, I don't know, you look at the movie True Grit.
Right.
He was put up with on a lot. I mean, she wanted somebody with true grit, somebody that
Sure.
would shoot first and ask questions later.
Sure.
And probably to survive during that, that's kind of how you had to be.
You've talked about
Yeah.
that line between outlaws,
Absolutely.
in-laws, sheriffs.
And it's very similar to that, to this day. There are people that will judge law enforcement officers from the comfort of their own home,
Oh, sure.
you know, and, but yet they don't want to stand post, you
No.
know, but yet they will be, after days, weeks, years, be able to Monday morning quarterback somebody's actions. But unless you've been in that situation, you truly, truly don't know what it's like. So I could see him, you know, doing what he had to do to get the guy off. Was it a cold-blooded murder? According to the jury, no, it wasn't. It was
No.
it was justified. It was justified homicide. So, but anyway, you know, he had a reputation. There's no doubt about it, and I guarantee you that reputation was based on a lot of aggressive actions that he probably took. Maybe some justified, some not justified. Probably some to this day would be considered extremely brutal, for sure.
Well, you talk about the pistol situation.
Yeah, yeah.
Bopping
And
the guy.
Absolutely. We'll go back to the bushwhacking ambush of Wiley Cox. So the fairgrounds to this day, we know, you know, is off of 50th Street. But before, Fairview Elementary School was
Right.
named as a result of the fact that where the school actually is now is kind of sitting on a hill.
Mhm.
You had a great view down below, down towards where Ramsey is now, where the
Right.
football field is. That was a field, and that's where the county fair used to be back
And there was a
then.
racetrack down there?
A racetrack,
Yeah.
absolutely. And Deputy Wiley Cox was assigned to the fair to keep, you know, order, peace, and so forth. And a gentleman by the name of John McNally
Mhm.
was drunk and disorderly. And from what records indicate, he pulled a Wyatt Earp, or Wiley Cox did, and pulled his pistol out and bam, bopped him on the head, and then grabbed him and booted him out of the county fair because he was drunk and disorderly. Well, later that evening, Cox is on his way home. He's on what is now Garrison Avenue, around 5th or 6th Street, I believe.
Right.
And from the shadows of an alley, rode John McNally, firing his pistol at Wiley Cox, and shot him multiple times in the chest, and went into his collarbone and so forth.
Right, and he doesn't die right away.
No, he sure doesn't. He doesn't. So that happened in 1890, but in 1891, he died of blood poisoning.
Right.
From the infection from lead and so forth. And John McNally fled in the Indian Nation.
And was still at large
And
at the
was-
time of Cox's death, April 13th, 1891.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. Eventually, the deputy marshals caught up with him. And we talked about skirting that line again of law enforcement officer to outlaw. He was in Tombstone working as a deputy sheriff when he was arrested and brought back to stand trial in Fort Smith for the death of Wiley Cox. The interesting note on that is he was found not guilty. And he was found not guilty because Wiley Cox didn't die from his bullets. He died from blood poisoning. And so
Lead poisoning,
lead
more
poisoning.
like.
There you go. Exactly. So
Yeah.
yeah, he died of blood poisoning,
Right.
lead poisoning, and he was acquitted because he didn't die from the actual initial bullets inside. So interesting story
Absolutely.
of Wiley Cox. And again, you know, I've got so many more exploits of Wiley Cox that's out there that is just yet to be told. But he is one of many, many law enforcement officers.
So this could be a
Present
part
and
two?
past. Yeah,
Oh, this-
absolutely.
oh, okay,
Yeah, I
okay.
think it's important. Maybe we start looking, maybe get some other marshals. Addison Beck. I mean, that's.
No, you say you have more about
Oh,
Wiley
we
Cox.
do have more about Wiley
Wow,
Cox. Absolutely.
okay.
Yeah, may have to do some more episodes on him. Absolutely.
I'm all in.
But it's, again, to me, you know, it's about the sacrifices of law enforcement officers, present and past, that they make every single day protecting our community.
Absolutely.
And these are the stories that are lost, and I think it's important that they're told. So the for anybody who's interested in researching, I think it's important, the project that you're working, the Fort Smith Historical Society, the Fort Smith Museum of History. I think that is another great place that.
And obviously the U.S. Marshals Museum and
Absolutely.
Fort Smith National Historic
Yes.
Site, great resources. In
Yes.
fact, what's coming up, Fort Smith National Historic Site has the symposium about Cherokee Bill.
Oh.
And two of our friends are going to be there, obviously talking about
Great.
that, Cody Faber and Professor Tom Wayne.
Mhm.
So
There
that
you
should
go.
be interesting. Anybody who has time to go see that, I think it'd be good.
Also, a side note on
Yes.
your True Grit episodes.
Tales of the True
Tales
Grit
of the
Trail.
True Grit
Right.
Trail, I think is also a really, really great resource to listen to.
Thank you.
Some of them are really interesting, and some of them, I mean, I like how you keep some of them lighthearted as well, to get all viewers or listeners to listen to that. And we actually did a podcast
That's
on that
right.
regarding Wiley Cox.
This
So,
was volume 8, I believe, episode 8, Deadshot Cox, The Adventures of Deputy Marshal Wiley Cox. So obviously we have more adventures to go through. We need to bring back Bill Hollenbeck to serve as Deadshot Cox again. But if you haven't heard, yes, Maddie Ross, portrayed by Maggie Jones, is the narrator of the stories, and they do run the gamut from portrayals of these famous people back and forth as if they're in the present and we're talking to them walking down the street, or, hey, did you hear about so-and-so? And then sometimes we also do one in which we'll have like a panel discussion like this about something historic, such as the heaving a rune stone or something like that we've done recently, or Judge Jim Spears we've talked about most recently. So it does run the gamut, and we're very happy about that. But I did also want to go back to one thing that we brought up. This was just very recent. September 2025, the Choctaw Nation and the Fort Smith Police Department signed a historic cross-deputization agreement. That's interesting. The Cherokee also have a cross-deputization program with Fort Smith PD. And so you go back into your history and you might see something that says Light Horse Special Deputy. Well, that's exactly what we're still doing. U.S. Marshals working actively with Light Horse Police still.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not the Old West. It's still happening now. And then we have Fort Smith Police Department working with their native police even to this day.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, back in the day, it's even when I was working up, you would have people from the Indian nations from Oklahoma,
Right.
coming into Arkansas to do their robbing and stealing, and then they would go back into eastern Oklahoma where their
Sure.
law enforcement is sparse, and that's what happened back in the 1800s. They did the same thing over
Sure.
and over and over again. And
Huge territory.
So, yeah, it is. It
And
really-
even to this day,
There's
look
challenges.
at the Western District of Arkansas and how big it still is.
Right. Yep. No joke. So I have several friends from Dallas PD that watch this podcast as well, and other
Thank you.
people from out of state. And I think it's so important that we talk about how valuable the city of Fort Smith and this region is when it comes to law enforcement history. We have, like you said, the U.S. Marshal Museum,
Right.
that honors all the exploits of deputy marshals from its inception when they were first appointed, by George Washington.
Absolutely.
To, like I said, the Fort Smith Museum of History, to all these other locations that we encourage all of you to come to Fort Smith and learn about law enforcement history. It's a great destination to come. And again, that jewel is that U.S. Marshals Museum. So we want people to come, bring their kids, bring their families, and
It's
come
down on
again.
a beautiful spot in the river, and just going back, how this kind of started, even as far back as 04 and 05, 2005, steering committee was trying to bring it home, was the big campaign,
Yes.
and Judge Spears was
Yes.
part of that as well. But local lawyer Jim Dunn was president and CEO of the U.S. Marshals Museum for many years, bringing it to Fort Smith, and he wrote an article about this when they were still trying to bring it here officially. But he does say U.S. Marshals Museum is not only about Fort Smith, nor Arkansas, nor Oklahoma, though both states have a broad and deep ties to it. It does trace the history all the way back to the Whiskey Rebellion, 1794, to modern events such as Oklahoma City and the World Trade Center bombings, fugitive hunts, civil rights legislation, Marshals today exploring the role of modern-day marshals, providing security for federal court personnel and courthouses, pursuing fugitives, special operations, asset forfeiture, prisoner transport, and witness protection. So it's not just True Grit and the Judge Parker era when we talk about marshals. There's a long history, and the museum is certainly worth coming to, not only for that timeline that you should look at, but the great events that are still down there too, and the educational opportunities for all ages. Really.
Trips for elementary school students to go
Sure.
down there, we highly encourage that as well. Speaking of Jim Dunn, what great work that he did along with Judge Spears, who was just an amazing man. That's a big loss for this community, and I really appreciate the episode that y'all did to honor him and his
having
legacy.
Tom Wing and Tom Shea on there and their discussion of what Judge Spears meant to the community in terms of history, and his writing of his book about the Cuban refugees at Chaffee and his representation of them.
And again, that can be seen on the Tales of the True Grit.
That's right,
So
talesoftheTrueGritTrail.com, or you can find them anywhere that you see good podcasts.
Like Spotify.
That's right.
A little plug for Spotify.
Yeah.
Hey, also, just we talk about how we had law enforcement officers back then would work from one department to the next. Just a little side note: the current United States Marshal is former sheriff of Sebastian County, Gary Grimes.
Right.
And now he
That's
is
correct.
the U.S. Marshal for the Western District of Arkansas.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, yeah, it's a little tongue twister, but I'm
another
very
good
proud
man.
of that. So
Another good man.
that's a neat thing to know. So we just want to thank all of y'all, closing right now, for joining us. Again, if you like this content, you like this podcast, please like this podcast, and please share it, and make sure that you subscribe to the camera itself. Dr. Jones, what else do you have to add?
That's
Anything
all I
good?
have. Thank you all
Okay.
very much, and look toward our next episode, which will be coming soon. And thank you for your support. If you would like to be a sponsor of this, what can they do?
Hey, they can reach out to Dr. Kevin Jones or myself. We're pretty easy to find on Facebook, and we certainly would welcome any type of sponsors and any type of advertisement that you'd like to advertise on our show. Please feel free to reach out to us. And all the proceeds will be going to the University of Arkansas Sound Collection Lab.
And we do
here in
appreciate the
Fort
Sound
Smith.
Collection Lab
Yes,
and all
we
that
do.
they've done here.
All right. Again, Kevin and I, thank you all so much for joining. Until next time.
Thank you.
Yeah.